Welcome. My name is Jose Melendez, Campaign Director for the Taxpayer Protection Project at TPPF, and today we're talking about taxpayer empowerment. We're going to delve into local government antics, misuse of public funds, and bond elections, and so much more. I'm delighted to introduce my guest, a conservative champion, former school board trustee for Round Rock ISD, Dr. Mary Bone. Dr. Bone, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. So in addition to having served on the school board, you've engaged the legislature, you've advocated at the legislature for good policy. Talk to us a moment about, what encouraged you to run for school board? What motivated you to make that move?
Yeah, so I have a PhD in systems engineering. I have a bachelor's in aerospace, and I find education was life-changing for myself and my husband. And we have two girls, and when they were in elementary school and middle school, I was very involved. I wanted to be very involved in their schools, and my kids went to private school for a while, and then they got into public school. And I started seeing things that were happening in the public schools. I was listening to teachers, and then COVID happened. And I actually ran for school board in November of 2020 when we were shutting down schools. Students were not learning. Parents were crying out on both sides of the aisle to open our schools back up. And that really motivated me to run for school board.
Excellent. So tell us for a moment, how was it being a conservative voice and maneuvering that process of being on the school board?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be easy because when I got on the school board, the majority of school board members in Round Rock were registered as Republicans, or they voted as Republicans in Texas since we don't register. But I thought this is going to be easy and we're going to do great things for our kids. But I realized there was really only two of us that had conservative values. And really those values, when I say conservative values on a school board, it's really just who's for the children. I find that, I just want children to learn. And I found that the majority of school board members had other agendas, and it wasn't about the children. So it was much more difficult than I thought it would be. Just doing simple things like getting kids educated in schools. I thought that would be the focus because that's what everybody says the focus on the school board is. But I realized that was not the focus of the majority of school board members.
So switching gears just a bit, as a school board trustee, you were a member of the Texas Association of School Boards, or TASB. I would love it if you talk to us about, what your experience was like being as a member of TASB. What was it like to be in the belly of the beast and, TASB and all its tentacles?
Yeah, so when I became a trustee, you automatically become a member of TASB, which I didn't really know anything about the Texas Association of School Boards when I became a member on my local school district. And then they just say, hey, you're a member of this organization now. So I start looking at it, and from all the website and everything, it looks like a pretty innocent organization. So it had lots of good resources. So I was like, okay, this works. But you may recall at one point, TASB and the National Association of School Boards put out some information that I believe they said something about parents being terrorists and that type of thing. And during that time, TASB, who I believe was a member of the National Association of School Boards, they didn't remove themselves from the National Association of School Boards. They were one of the organizations that waited a while to remove themselves. And I actually asked to not be a member of TASB. And I found out that they didn't know how to do that. And so
There's no process in place?
There was no process in place that if I didn't believe in what TASB was doing, that I could unenroll myself from being a member, even though we are members individually in TASB. I did go to some of their conferences, and I found some of the behavior there very concerning, mostly the parties, lots of alcohol. I remember showing up in San Antonio to the big TASB conference, and the first thing that they gave me was 2 free drinks, sponsored by Panorama. And if you're not familiar with Panorama, I encourage people to go look at who Panorama was. They were data mining children's data. And, they're sponsoring drinks. And so everybody's drinking, everybody's partying, having a good time. And I was there to learn. I was there for the children. I'm not there to, drink and party. And then you would go to these individual sessions that they would have. And if people go look, there's been very concerning sessions that they have about, how to deal with difficult parents. I don't find parents to be difficult when they're advocating for their children. I mean, usually the difficult parents are the ones that their children really need a lot of help. That's why they're there complaining. In fact, I can't I don't know if I can recall a difficult parent that wasn't at the school board because something was happening with their child. So there was sessions like that. There was sessions where, you have Moat Casey lawyers telling school board members that, maybe they shouldn't give teachers raises. Maybe they should, hold off on giving teachers raises until, certain legislation passes. So these types of sessions were really concerning to me as a TASB member. And after a while, I have to say, I'm not a fan of the Texas Association of School Boards.
I'm very much in the belief of this quote that says, when they tell you who they are, believe them. And so on that note, I want to read for a moment from the TASB 2024-26 advocacy agenda, because it spells out a lot of things that they oppose. So it says, TASB opposes legislation that increases ballot language requirements, limits dates upon which elections may be held, or creates additional requirements for voter approval tax rate elections and bond elections, such as voter turnout thresholds. And so they explicitly state their opposition to uniform election dates for bonds, and there's a lot of special interests that have a stranglehold on these bond elections. Can you talk a little bit about TASB's part in all of this, and what can the legislature do?
Yeah, first I'd like to point out that as a trustee, I can't recall on our board ever discussing this specific issue. So, the Texas Association of School Boards like to say that they're member-driven. Mm-hmm. Well, where does that come from? Like, show me the school districts that have specifically asked them to, fight for legislation on that type of bond language. And so that should be first and foremost. So then you have to ask, who is behind TASB that's pulling these type of strings that want these type of bond elections? And if you dig into TASB, they have 114 types of different services, all the way from placing superintendents to, I believe it's called buy board, where they have a lot of the vendors and contractors. And they are tied in. When I go to the TASB conferences, I mentioned Panorama, but if you go to the TASB conferences, they're also sponsored by the big contractors, the people that build your schools, the people that sell the software. And so when they're advocating for these type of legislation, you have to ask, is this really for the school districts or is this for the contractors? And I think that's specific, with bonds and when they are being held. I don't think the school boards even know that they're asking for that type of legislation. I think that's being driven from the contractor side, unfortunately paid for, though, by the school boards that pay for the Texas Association of School Boards.
Yeah, I also want to read from our latest TPPF bond election report. So this is for May of 2025, the most recent bond election. There was a total of 159 ISD bonds that were proposed, totaling almost $13 billion. And of those, 126 were approved. That's a nearly 80% passage rate. Does that surprise you at all?
It doesn't surprise me. I'll just walk you through. When I was on the board at Round Rock, they went out for almost $1 billion bond. Mm-hmm. And the school district spent 200, and let me get the number because sure. I believe it was $230,000 where they were promoting what they were going to do with the bond. That's not electioneering by the state, but I think you and I would say that's electioneering because they only put out positive information. So when you have the regular citizen who's just trying to go to work, raise their kids, and when they're getting bombarded with all of this information that's paid for by the school district and it's only positive, and then you're also bombarded by these PACs that pop up that are supported by the contractors and the local chambers, I think it's really hard for the, common citizen just to figure out, who's telling the truth and who isn't, right, in this day of misinformation. And so I think most people in my community, people think it's for the children because that's what they're being told. They'll go through and get pictures of a ceiling tile where, it's wet. And, oh my goodness, we have a roof that's leaking and it's one ceiling tile, right? And they put all this propaganda out. The district does, the contractors. And so everything is stacked against the citizens. And we all want to do something for the children, right? Like, I mean, if you're telling me that children are living in mold infested buildings, I might be like, yeah, like let's, tear that thing down and rebuild another one. But it's amazing that for years, that building can be there, things can be happening, and it's fine. But then all of a sudden, maybe a contractor, is needing another job, and it appears that all of a sudden, a school needs to be rebuilt, or, we need a new school, or they need a new swimming pool or stadium, or something new needs to happen.
Switching gears once again, so one common misconception that the public has about the state is that the state actually sets the tax rate, but in fact, it's local jurisdictions that do. School boards, cities, and counties. Can you talk to this and also tell us other things that you think the public may not know about their school boards?
Yeah, so when I was a trustee, the school district sets 2 tax rates. We set the M&O tax rate, which is also known as the general fund, and then you set the INS tax rate, which is where the bonds are paid out of. So as the trustees, we vote on that. There are some laws around how that can be, voted on or approved and how much we can approve, but the trustees have full control over those tax rates. Lots of trustees just listen to their superintendent. The superintendent brings them those tax rates and they just pass it. But at the end of the day, the trustees are the ones that have the responsibility to dig in and understand, what those tax rates are and how much needs to be approved or not approved and how that's going to affect your citizens. And then some other things that we do as school board trustees that I think people might be surprised about is honestly everything in a school district. I always used to say that, the height of the grass on the football field, that really is something that the trustees, if they're not happy that, the field is overgrown at the football stadium, that is their job to make sure that, every piece of property is maintained and that the students are learning. That all is the responsibility of the board. It is not the superintendent. In fact, the superintendent is just supposed to be doing the day-to-day operations to enforce what the school board wants. And I do know lots of times school board members will say, well, we don't do that. We don't hire that person. We don't mow the grass. And I would highly disagree. And I've looked into the laws, and the law says the school board has the right to represent their values through the whole school district.
So local government spending is completely out of control across the state. So many local jurisdictions spending, your counties, your cities, your school boards spending money on the next best progressive idea or their pet projects. Can you provide us just a few examples from your time on the school board or other examples you may have seen?
Yeah, one of them I've already talked about, which is just spending money on bonds, passing bonds, $200,000, right? Over $200,000. If you break that down, that's at least 2 teachers, if not 3 or 4 teachers that could be full-time in the classroom. In Round Rock, we also, when I was on the board, something that popped up was we were putting together a dispatch unit for the school district. We used to dispatch, I believe it was out of Williamson County, but all of a sudden, the board didn't even vote on this. But all of a sudden, we found out that we were spending money on a dispatch. And I believe that was in the tens of thousands of dollars, like 50 to 80, I believe is what that was. And there's many of these pet projects. There was another one that the superintendent in past years had gotten a fund every year where he could do pet projects basically. And one school got an underground playground. And I believe the cost was almost $500,000. It was something like $500,000 to build this underground playground. And in the past, trustees would, they would look at the whole budget and say, this is no big deal, right? $80,000, $500,000. What's happened is there's many of these. There's so many that I can't even list them. And I will be honest, as a trustee, there was no way to find out that these were happening. Like I told you, this dispatch unit that they were spending tens of thousands of dollars on, we didn't even know about it. All of a sudden, it was just happening. Money was being spent. And then the trustees are walked back into a room and shown, hey, look, you have this dispatch now. It has all these screens and we're hiring people and the trustees are, you're either on board or it's already happened without your knowledge. So I think that might surprise people that trustees are shocked or, just that kind of stuff is a surprise to us sometimes. I would encourage trustees that would be to hold the superintendent accountable and not allow those kind of surprises to happen.
Staying on the topic of local government spending, and final question, one area where they're spending money on is these taxpayer-funded lobbyists. So cities, counties, school boards are giving our tax dollars to contract lobbyists that come here to our Capitol and advocate against, the principles and ideas that you and I value. How do we solve this problem, and why do we need to ban this practice?
Yeah, I'll hit on your second question first. Why do we need to ban the practice? As a trustee and a mom, like you said, I'm a former trustee, so I'm not on the board anymore. I'm just a citizen. And when I was on the board, when I came down to advocate, I was having to compete with these people that are hired by school districts to literally camp out at the Capitol and get their voice heard, where I was a mom and a trustee, and to get my voice heard, I was marginalized. And it really marginalizes not only trustees, elected officials, local elected officials that come to the Capitol to advocate, it also marginalizes parents who take off a day of work to come down to the Capitol and advocate, because they're fighting against these people that are paid to live here in Austin, to be at the Capitol every day, to literally camp out. I've watched them, right? They're there in every school policy session, and they're advocating for things that lots of times are against the parents. I also think people should ask, especially with these Texas of Association of like school boards, these big organizations, that just think about it. How does one organization represent all 1,200 school boards? I mean, I was on the Round Rock School Board, but think about a rural school district. Do they have the same values as Round Rock? Do they have the same values as, Austin ISD or Dallas ISD? I think people need to ask, are they advocating for your values? And I would say no. I watch them advocate actually against my values. And I think people would be surprised that that's what they're paying for. So I think the government needs to be given back to the people. And I would say it is the responsibility of local school officials and local school board members to come down to the Capitol if you want your voice heard. That is your job. To contact your legislators, that is your job. Because people can't hold the lobbyist accountable. Even when I was here, I didn't know who my lobbyist was for my school district. Even though I was a school board member, my school district was hiring them, I couldn't have pointed them out. And so when they're up at the mic and they're advocating for something, I may not know that they're actually using my tax dollars to advocate against me, because I don't even know who that person is. But you know who your local school board members are if you're engaged. And if you see them down at the Capitol advocating, you can hold them accountable for what they're advocating for or against. So we need to remove that. Really, I think it's a loophole, right? I think it's a loophole that needs to be closed up so that we can hold our government accountable and give the government back to the people, and that they can know what their tax dollars are being used for. And then
I think to your point, you touched on another bucket, the first one being, we need to ban contract lobbyists from using our tax dollars to advocate at the Capitol, but also the associations such as TASB, TML, that use our membership dues that are tax dollars to then do the same, hire contract lobbyists to advocate at the Capitol.
Yeah, the contract lobbyists, like I said, we don't even know who they are. And I actually pulled Round Rock's contract lobbyists today. You can go to Transparency USA. I think people really should go out and dig into sites like that to see who is your school district's lobbyist. And that's one way you can do it. And I didn't even know the names. I didn't even know the names. And it's interesting because the name I thought should show up didn't show up. So it's also interesting to know, how is this money being accounted for? People might, if you've talked to your school board members, they're going to say, well, we have to publish this money, right? So people may not know, but when you publish the budget, there's actually a law that you have to publish how much you're spending on taxpayer-funded lobbying. When I was on the school board, we said we were spending like $800 on taxpayer-funded lobbying. But I know a community member that got a contract that said we were spending somewhere around $4,500 a month on a contract lobbyist. So there's these discrepancies and nobody's holding them accountable. That's the other thing with the contract lobbyist is that the lobbyists that we hired when I was on the Round Rock School Board, they would come and give an update, but there was no real metrics on how they were graded, or how do we know they're doing a good job, and how do we know we're spending our money where it should be spent and we're getting what we should for the money that we're paying. There were no metrics. So they would just come and say, this is an update on what's happening in the legislature. I think we can get those from lots of organizations like your own. There's a lot of organizations out there that already do that. So I don't think we need a contract lobbyist to say, these are the bills that are down at the Capitol. And again, I really think they actually do more harm than good. And that's been my experience as not just, like I said, not just a trustee, but a mom, because I've watched parents come here. You've been at the Capitol, and you'll meet a new person, right? And they've taken the day off work because something's really important to them. They've come from, East Texas or West Texas or way North Texas, which is pretty far away from Austin. And you're watching them have to go up against these lobbyists. And I think the other thing is lots of these lobbyists don't do things in the light. They go into the offices of the legislators. And that's also a real big problem. Is I actually tried to find like what our lobbyist was doing, in the meetings and the sessions and where they were on camera. And lots of times the lobbyists wouldn't even speak. And I was like,
I think you made two good points. So I'm reminded of SB 2 from 2019, which was the big property tax reform bill. On one side, you had 80% of the folks in opposition were taxpayer-funded lobbyists. On the other side, the folks in favor of the bill were 100% private citizens who paid their way to come to our Capitol. And I think that's very telling about the problem that we're trying to solve here. But also to your point, a lot of these lobbyists try to accomplish what they're setting out to do before they even reach a committee hearing. They go to a member's office and try to work behind the scenes.
Yeah, they do. And it's also interesting. I brought this and I found this interesting. There was a lobbyist actually for TASB, and he was lobbying. He was helping drag queens lobby. And again, that goes to the accountability. What time? Whose time was he on? Right? These people. When we get our legal bills, I think they're done every 10 minutes. But what are these lobbyists spending their time on? So you have a TASB, lobbyist who's spending their time per an article that was put out by his son that he was helping drag queens, lobby at the Capitol. So what are these lobbyists spending their time on? And like you said, lots of this is done behind the scenes. So we don't get to see. And if you don't see, you can't hold your school boards accountable and your tax dollars accountable.
That's very true. Dr. Bone, thank you so much for joining the show, and thank you for your important voice here in this good fight.
Thank you very much.